A chance encounter between a disillusioned physicist and a runaway woman sparks a transformative connection, but their happiness is challenged by the people around them. Boris Yelnikov, a cynical hypochondriac who's been nominated for the Nobel Prize, is out in New York engaging in philosophical discussions with his friends. He interrupts their conversation to address us, questioning why we'd even be interested in his story. He tries to make his friends understand that they have an audience, but he's the only one intelligent enough to see the bigger picture. Approaching the screen, Boris launches into a tirade about societal norms and our obsession with trivial matters. His cynicism leads him to reject happiness and life, since everything is meaningless. Boris also mentions his attempt at taking his life, despite his privileged existence of being married to a wealthy and beautiful woman, and his illustrious career as a quantum physics professor at Columbia University. Boris recalls waking up in the middle of the night, consumed by thoughts of his own mortality. Jessica, his then-wife, suggested he resume taking medication, but he adamantly refused, unwilling to cloud his mind with chemicals. This led to a heated argument where the professor brought up Jessica's past affair, and they exchanged angry compliments, bewildered by the fact that their supposedly ideal marriage was actually a disaster. Frustrated, Boris opened the window and jumped out, much to Jessica's horror. To his astonishment, he only ended up with a limp. He shares that he subsequently gave up on life, divorced Jessica, and now spends his days teaching chess to kids whom he calls incompetent zombies. However, his condescending nature makes him a terrible teacher. That evening, after clarifying to an angry parent that he didn't hit her son, but rather dumped the chess pieces on him, Boris's friends call it a night. As he enters his apartment, he encounters Melody, a runaway southern woman begging for food. Despite his caustic demeanor, Boris allows her in. Inside the apartment, Boris sings Happy Birthday twice while washing his hands, perplexing Melody. After introductions, she excitedly shares her favorite foods, and Boris offers her sardines, which she graciously accepts. Eventually, the Southern beauty queen asks Boris if she can stay with him until she becomes successful in New York. In response, the man advises her to return home instead, bluntly stating that she's only a New York 3 out of 10 appearance-wise and would likely end up working corners. Despite calling her every variation of dumb known to man, Boris finds himself unable to kick Melody out, and she ends up sleeping on his couch. 2 days later, Boris's friends gather at their usual spot, and Joe shares that a woman answered the phone when he called Boris. They all have a good laugh, imagining the chess teacher showing a naive countrywoman around New York City. Meanwhile, at Gramps' tomb, Melody shares the first time she committed a sin. She reveals that she made love with Bombi before marriage, a local boy who'd caught the largest catfish in her county, inside a tent during a community gathering. Boris is repulsed by the idea of people making love, especially at a social event. Later, Boris wakes up in the middle of the night, worried to death about sweating. Unlike Jessica, Melody entertains and watches TV with him until he calms down. On another day, Melody recites the Statue of Liberty's famous poem, sending Boris on a tangent about racial injustice and abducting Africans. Melody agrees with everything he says, deferring to his intelligence, and then asks what field he excels in. The former professor responds with quantum mechanics, to which the Southern beauty queen questions if that's a music genre. A month after Melody moved in, Boris is out with his friends when they ask about her. Surprisingly, the grumpy old man showers her with compliments, although they're more like insults. According to Boris, Melody is a New York 6 out of 10 passable when desperate. Upon returning home, Boris finds Melody preparing a special dinner. He begins easing his way into kicking her out, but it's overshadowed when she excitedly shares her new job as a dog walker. Appalled, Boris insists that she should return home and complete her education. Unexpectedly, Melody echoes his take that the American education system produces mindless zombies, leading Boris to remark that it's still an improvement from her current situation. Once the food is done, Melody makes another announcement. Sheepishly, she admits having developed a crush on the abrasive, belligerent, and cynical genius. Without hesitation, Boris rejects her, listing all the negative aspects accompanying a relationship with him. He finds the idea preposterous to even consider marrying someone not unattractive as Melody. Disregarding the rest of what he said, Melody is glad that Boris finds her beautiful. Boris insists that love is overly romanticized, not all-powerful, and only temporary. He believes that love is simply making do with what's available and whatever works. However, Melody has been influenced by his intellect to some extent, and she deflects his opinions. When she walks away, Boris turns to address us, expressing his disbelief at Melody's attraction to him. He comments that she's a lost case and he would rather jump out the window than attempt to save her. During one of her walks, Melody meets Perry. They walk together and Melody discusses their inevitable demise in a cheerful, southern manner. Later, as Boris berates his chess student for her bad performance, Melody invites him to walk home together. As usual, the chess teacher begins complaining about one of his imaginary illnesses. Melody interrupts his ramblings to inform him about her upcoming date with Perry. Although momentarily taken aback, Boris advises her to ensure that Perry isn't a serial killer. When Perry arrives to pick up Melody, he mistakenly refers to Boris as her father. After being corrected, Perry then labels Boris as her grandfather until his date clarifies that they're just friends. Before they depart, Boris reminds Melody once again to ensure that her date isn't a serial killer. At the concert, Melody stands out like a disco ball among the drab New Yorkers. Meanwhile, the physicist meets up with his friends, who notice his extra unpleasantness. Leo inquires about Melody's whereabouts, and Boris remarks that she's out listening to garbage. Joe assumes that she'd already been kicked out. The chess teacher clarifies that he's hoping her date will do it for him, especially since she's a pretty New York 8. The friends exchange surprised glances, as a compliment from their typically acidic companion is unusual. Upon returning home, Boris seems disappointed not to find Melody there. However, moments later, she arrives. Boris inquires about her date, and the woman responds tipsily that they're all too positive about life, like protons. Her rants soon mirror Boris's own cynical perspective, and when she shares a story about someone being caught making love to a sheep, she dismisses it with a casual, whatever works. The physicist contemplates the vastness of the universe and the improbability of their meeting. And just like that, Boris and Melody get married. After a year, Boris addresses us again, noting that it hasn't been the worst year of his life. Melody introduces him to more southern cuisine, like grits, which Boris claims is disgusting. While running errands together, he informs us that unlike his previous wife, who was smart and predatory, Melody is cheerful and accommodating. Her affection for children is limited to caring for others' kids, and she accompanies Boris to the hospital when his imaginary diseases flare up. He acknowledges that their life is routine, but it stops him from jumping out of windows. One day, Boris suggests that Melody listens to Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, describing it as fate knocking on her door. Coincidentally, as the music plays, there's a literal knock on her door. She opens it to find her mother, Marietta, elated to see her. Marietta enters with her luggage, disappointed at the interior. Melody then reveals that she's married, leaving her mother in need of a drink and a moment of prayer. The daughter then chides her mother for still believing in Christianity. Suddenly, Boris starts singing Happy Birthday from the bathroom, and as he limps out, the mother collapses upon seeing her daughter's husband. When Marietta regains consciousness, she expresses her disappointment in Boris, to which he retorts that she'd probably prefer her daughter to marry the guy who caught the biggest catfish in their county. The mother remarks that she'd even prefer the catfish. Melody defends her husband, stating that he's a genius and has been nominated for the Nobel Prize in the Best Picture category. Marietta then shares the recent series of unfortunate events, starting with her divorce when her husband left her for her best friend, to losing the house and everything they had. As the woman calls on God for a sign, Boris emphasizes that God isn't real. Soon, the couple tours Marietta around the city, which is much different from her southern lifestyle. During lunch with Leo, Marietta excuses herself to go to the bathroom, where she encounters Randy, an actor who fell in love with Melody upon seeing her at the restaurant. When Marietta returns, she suggests that they visit Madame Tussauds, a wax figure museum. As the mother and daughter leave, Leo expresses his undisguised desire for Boris's mother-in-law and her pear-shaped figure. At the wax museum, the mother asks about Boris's limp, and Melody explains that he got it from jumping out of a window and trying to take his life. Disappointed by Boris's unsuccessful attempt, Marietta suggests that her daughter deserves someone better than a man who sings happy birthday while washing his hands. She persuades Melody to meet Randy, but her daughter refuses. That night, as Boris sings happy birthday, Leo calls Marietta and invites her on a date. On their date, the two watch a movie. During drinks, Marietta shows Leo her many pictures of Melody, impressing him with the composition of the photographs. Intrigued, he decides to show the pictures to his business partner, Al Morgenstern, who happens to run a gallery. Later, Boris comments on the drastic change that swept through Marietta. After meeting Al, she enters into an open relationship with both the gallery organizer and Leo. Her fashion sense changed, and she adopted habits that would have clashed with her southern upbringing. However, despite these alterations, she still dislikes Boris. One day, Marietta drags her daughter to a flea market under the pretense of seeking inspiration for her new art collage. However, her true intention is to allow Randy to meet Melody. The actor attempts to charm her and eventually confesses his love, presenting her with an antique handkerchief as a token of his affection. Although Melody declines his advances, she's visibly flustered. She asserts that she's happily married, prompting her mother to interject that Melody is more like a nurse than a wife. Melody politely excuses herself, though still holding on to Randy's gift. While Boris and his wife are out biking, the husband indulges in his usual complaints. This makes Melody unexpectedly observe that he seems determined not to enjoy life, comparing him to a child throwing a tantrum. Surprised by her insight, Boris admits that his life has improved since they met. He then asks about the antique handkerchief she's holding, mentioning the countless boogers it's collected in the past. One day, as Marietta prepares food for her two boyfriends, she receives a call from Randy. She tells him where her daughter will be shopping. Wishing him luck, the mother mentions that he stands a good chance since Melody still keeps his gift. Later, Melody is browsing clothes when Randy asks her opinion on a particular shirt. As she shops, he tactfully makes her realize that being with Boris has no advantages. The actor then invites her to see his boat, and despite her refusal, they end up there anyway. Melody immediately regrets getting inside the boat, saying she's already married. Still, Randy confesses that he fell in love with her at first sight, and is now even more drawn to her because of her peculiar remarks, unaware that most of it she got from Boris. When Melody compliments his appearance, he responds with a kiss, throwing her mind into turmoil. Moments later, she finds herself fully committed to the affair. Days pass, and Melody is overwhelmed with guilt. However, she tries to be upbeat, especially since it's the opening of her mother's art exhibit. Suddenly, there's a knock on their door, and it turns out to be John, her father. He declares that he's come to seek Marietta's forgiveness, acknowledging that running off with her best friend was a mistake. As Boris and John become acquainted, the guest falls to his knees, begging God for forgiveness. Melody assures her father that no one's listening, just like Marietta won't be listening. Despite their hints at her mother's new disposition and relationships, John demands to see her. Upon entering the gallery, John firmly believes that a person can't undergo a drastic change in just a year. However, his beliefs are soon shattered. Not only does he see her daring photographs, but he also fails to recognize his ex-wife. After Marietta reveals her polyamorous situation, John accepts that he can no longer have her back. Following the gallery incident, Melody musters the courage to confess her affair to Boris. She breaks the routine and drags him to a cafe, where she blurts out that she has fallen in love with someone else. It takes a while to register, but Boris manages to hide his disappointment. Instead of lashing out, he rationalizes, falling back on his belief that love is temporary. When Melody says that she misses the world and all its stupidity, including the protons that are too positive on life, Boris recognizes her growth. He acknowledges that it's right for her to leave and pursue her happiness. As for him, he reverts to his old self, belittling her as a defense mechanism. Meanwhile, John is at a bar where he meets Howard, a man who recently lost his husband. They bond over their similar circumstances, and John opens up about his own marriage to Marietta, admitting that he only married her because it was expected. However, he reveals that he lost interest in her over time and eventually got involved with their best friend. But even that fizzled out. John then confesses that his true motivation for marrying Marietta was to suppress his desire for his football teammates, which he would feel when they bent over during games. This was Howard's cue to buy him more drinks. On a serene starlit night, while Marietta's throuple is in bed and Melody enjoys her time with Randy, Boris sings happy birthday moments before jumping out the window. As he lays on top of the woman who unsuspectingly broke his fall, Boris is in disbelief that he's 0 for 2 on his attempts. While Helena, the woman Boris landed on, is recovering in the hospital, he visits her and realizes that, despite being intellectually compatible, they're opposite in every other way. Helena reveals that she's a psychic who can see into the future. The physicist scoffs and questions why she didn't see him falling on her. The woman slyly responds that perhaps that's why she was there. As they await the new year, John and Howard are now a couple. Boris mentions that they've moved in together and, more importantly, John is now Jewish and happy. While the divorced couple remark on their urges now being satisfied, Boris addresses Melody and Randy, expressing his hopes for their successful relationship. Melody reciprocates the well wishes, and the formerly grumpy old man remarks that everyone longs to meet the right person, while he just jumps out of a window to land on Helena. Additionally, he admits to being a grits enjoyer now. As the New Year's ball drops and the celebrations ensue, Boris reminds us to get or give whatever love we can and provide or steal whatever happiness we can. What matters is whatever is enough and whatever works. When everyone else wonders who he's talking to, he once again emphasizes that he's the only one who can see the big picture, because he's a genius.
In the near future, Earth has been totally destroyed by nuclear wars and it is almost impossible to live on it. For this reason, a group of colonists is sent to the moon to establish a base for future colonies. Unfortunately, the colonization is a failure, so instead they open mines to get as many resources from the moon as possible. Miners have to work for 20 years, then they are allowed to fly to a planet called Omega, where humanity is currently thriving. The trip takes 75 years, so travelers must be put in cryosleep. 50 years pass since humanity reaches the moon, giving rise to the birth of many children, who are bored of living inside the mines while stuck in a routine. It is now